Roadside deaths are not always the result of simple accidents. Some are bizarre, terrifying, and almost impossible to believe, from freak collisions to haunting mishaps that unfolded in plain sight. These cases prove that even a routine drive or a brief roadside stop can spiral into unimaginable horror. What makes these stories even more disturbing is how sudden they are, ordinary moments shattered in seconds, with no warning and no escape. Today, we're diving into the 5 most horrifying roadside deaths ever, true stories. So shocking they blur the line between tragic accident and waking nightmare.
The accident was at a well-known danger spot. In the French countryside, there are more and more big vehicles, too often travelling at speed.
It began as one of those quiet mornings that feel almost sacred. October 23rd, 2015. A group of retirees from the tiny village of Petit Palais et Cornat boarded a bus together, smiling, chatting, teasing one another the way people do when they've known each other for decades. These weren't strangers sharing a ride. They were neighbors, couples, friends who had grown old side by side. The plan was simply a peaceful day trip through the vineyards near Saint-Emilion, a chance to enjoy the beauty of the land and each other's company. The bus rolled forward, tires humming along a narrow, winding road framed by dense forest. Trees pressed in close, their shadows stretching across the asphalt. Inside, coats were folded, seatbelts clicked, conversations drifted between memories and laughter. No one felt rushed, no one felt afraid. Nothing about the moment hinted that it was already slipping away. Around a bend ahead, coming from the opposite direction, a logging truck appeared. It was massive, heavy with timber, awkward on the tight road. Behind the wheel was 30-year-old Cyril Alexandre. Beside him sat his 3-year-old son. Strapped to the truck was something far more dangerous than the logs themselves. A large external gasoline tank used for chainsaws, filled and exposed. As the truck entered the curve, something shifted. Whether it was the weight, the speed, or the unforgiving shape of the road, control was suddenly gone. The truck jackknifed violently, its massive frame swinging sideways across the narrow lane. In that split second, the bus driver saw steel filling the road. Nowhere to go, no time to escape. The collision was brutal. Metal screamed as it crushed into metal. The force threw passengers forward, snapping bodies against seats, and then came the sound no one ever forgets: the rupture. The gasoline tank burst open, fuel pouring out in seconds, spreading across the road and sliding directly beneath the bus. Sparks flew. A heartbeat later, the fire ignited. It didn't creep, it didn't grow, it exploded. Flames roared up the sides of the bus, swallowing it almost instantly. Heat tore through the cabin. Plastic fixtures melted and dripped. Thick black smoke flooded the air, stealing breath, stealing sight, stealing time. People screamed. Others froze. Some never even stood up. In the space of moments, the bus became an oven, a trap, a nightmare no one could wake from. Somehow, the driver reacted. Seeing the fire erupt, he forced open the emergency exits before the inferno sealed them shut. That single act saved a handful of lives, but for most of the passengers, the fire was already too fast. Jean-Claude Léonard was 73 years old. He and his wife Josette had just finished fastening their seatbelts when the world collapsed around them. He would later say the flames spread like lightning. There was no plan, no thought, only instinct. He unbuckled them both and dragged her toward an exit as smoke burned their lungs. They tumbled out onto the road, gasping, alive. Then Jean-Claude looked back. Inside the bus, friends he had known for years were trapped, faces pressed toward windows. Hands reached out through smoke and fire. Without hesitation, he ran back. Flames licked at his clothes. Heat scorched his skin. Alongside another driver, he managed to pull 2 people free before the fire became unbearable. Tires began to explode. Windows shattered outward. The bus groaned, then roared. As if alive, there was no going back again. When the fire finally died down, the truth was devastating. 41 people had died inside the bus. Many never had the chance to move. Emergency hammers were there, but panic, smoke, confusion, and the speed of the blaze made them meaningless. Some passengers couldn't reach them. Some didn't know where to look. Some were overtaken before they understood what was happening. Cyril Alexandre and his little boy never escaped the truck. In total, 43 lives were lost in minutes. France had not seen a road disaster like this in over 30 years.
Next tonight, here to the stunning death in Hollywood. A young actor, a rising star, known for his work on Star Trek. He was killed trapped between his SUV and his driveway gate, and it turns out his Jeep is one of hundreds of thousands included in a recall.
Anton Yelchin was only 27 years old, standing at the edge of a future that felt wide open. To millions of fans, he was the wide-eyed, brilliant Pavel Chekhov in Star Trek, a character full of hope, intelligence, and youthful confidence. Off-screen, Anton was the opposite of a Hollywood cliché. He was soft-spoken, deeply artistic, and intensely curious about the world around him. He played guitar, took photographs, and chased meaning more than fame. Everything about his life suggested there was so much more still to come. And yet, in the early hours of June 19, 2016, his story ended in a place no one ever expects to die: the quiet, familiar space of his own driveway. That night began like any other. Anton returned home to his house in Studio City, Los Angeles, after a long day. The driveway was narrow and steep, sloping sharply down toward the street, something he had navigated countless times before. There was no sense of danger, no looming threat. At some point, after parking his Jeep Grand Cherokee, he stepped out of the vehicle, possibly to check his locked gate or retrieve mail. It was a routine, almost forgettable action. Then, without a sound, everything changed. The SUV began to roll backward. There was no engine revving, no sudden jolt to warn him, just slow, unstoppable movement. In seconds, Anton was pinned between the massive weight of the vehicle and a brick pillar alongside a metal security fence. The space was too tight. There was nowhere to move, nowhere to run. By the time anyone could have heard or seen something was wrong, it was already too late. The silence of the moment makes it even more chilling. No crash, no explosion, just quiet pressure closing in. When Anton failed to arrive at a scheduled rehearsal, concern quickly turned into panic. Friends went to check on him, expecting confusion or delay, but what they found instead was something almost impossible to comprehend. Anton was already dead, trapped exactly where the car had crushed him. The coroner later ruled the cause of death as blunt traumatic asphyxia. He had died at home, alone, in the space meant to protect him from the outside world. As details emerged, the tragedy took on an even darker layer. Anton's Jeep model was later linked to a recall involving a poorly designed gear shifter that could make drivers believe the vehicle was safely in park when it wasn't. Similar rollaway incidents had already been reported. The idea that this death may not have been a random freak accident, but something that could have been prevented, haunted fans, friends, and the industry alike. It wasn't just fate, it was a flaw. What makes Anton Yelchin's death so deeply disturbing isn't just the shock of it, but how ordinary the moment was. No high-speed chase, no reckless behavior, no warning signs. Just a quiet night, a familiar driveway, and a split second where gravity and design failure took control. In a world where celebrity deaths often come wrapped in chaos or controversy, Anton's stands out for its cruel simplicity. A young artist, full of unfinished work and unfulfilled promise, lost not on the road or under bright lights, but just steps from his own front door, in a tragedy that still feels unreal. She was only 12, bright, joyful, full of life, the kind of girl who could light up a room without even trying. Trevan Hope. Joslin wasn't just a student at Taverham High School in Norfolk. She was a presence, confident, kind, and one of the best gymnasts in her class. No one imagined that an ordinary day in gym class would be her last. It was March 12, 2014. Just another PE session. A simple gymnastics lesson. Nothing extreme, nothing dangerous, just children laughing, stretching, and tumbling across mats under the familiar echo of bouncing sneakers. Near the end of class, students could choose their favorite apparatus. Trevan, as always, was eager. She went for the pommel horse. She had already completed a few successful vaults. Everything seemed normal. She sprinted toward the horse with the grace and determination of a girl who had done this countless times before. But this time, her right foot caught the edge of the apparatus. A fraction of a second, a tiny misstep. Trevan tumbled forward, landing face down on the mat. At first, No one realized how serious it was. She looked like she might recover. Friends gathered around, some thinking she had simply been winded. But then the fear set in. She tried to speak, but the words barely came. Something was terribly wrong. The PE teacher rushed to her side. Staff called for help. The school's pastoral care supervisor, Lynn Hammond, began CPR. Everyone hoped, prayed that she would breathe, that she would be okay. But as Trevan was rushed to Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, the harsh truth was already taking hold. Doctors confirmed the unthinkable: a catastrophic hyperextension of the neck. Her spinal cord had been critically damaged. Trevan fought for her life for a week, but on March 19, 2014, she passed away. A bright, young life gone in the blink of an eye. The inquest revealed that Trevan had a pre-existing neck condition, one that could have limited her ability to safely participate in high-impact gymnastics. The school was aware, but not all staff had been informed due to an administrative oversight. Investigators were clear. It wasn't negligence. No wrongdoing was found. Even a child with a perfectly healthy neck could have suffered a fatal injury that day. Still, knowing there was no fault offered little comfort. The assistant head teacher, Shirley Naseby, remembered Trevan with tears. She was confident, enthusiastic, one of the better gymnasts in the class, she said. The last memory of Trevan, smiling mid-run, vaulting toward her future, remained painfully vivid. Her parents chose silence in the media, a grief too deep for words, but the school sought to honor her memory. A quiet garden was created, a cherry tree planted in her name. Head teacher Peter Ware said students and teachers still remember her warmth. She always had a smile on her face. She will be remembered with great fondness. The official verdict was accidental, but for anyone who has ever sent a child off to school thinking they were safe, it felt like more. It felt like the very fabric of an ordinary day had been ripped apart, leaving a void that could never be filled.
Townsville was last month found guilty of breaches after the death of a 19-year-old gymnast in June last year. Michelle Maitland fell and hit her head on a section of concrete.
June 18, 2009, Townsville, Australia. The night started like any other. 19-year-old Michelle Maitland bounded out the front door, calling back to her mother, "Are we having that steak when I get home?" She never waited for an answer and she never came back. That was the last time her mother would hear her voice. Inside the Aitkenvale gym, the familiar rhythm of practice filled the air. Feet hitting mats, bodies flipping, coaches shouting encouragement. But on that night, one misstep, one overlooked detail, would turn routine training into tragedy. Michelle, determined and focused, attempted a backward twisting layout, a move meant for elite gymnasts. She soared into the air, body spinning, heart racing. For a fleeting moment, everything seemed perfect. Then, disaster struck. Instead of landing on the safety of padded mats, Michelle crashed headfirst onto bare concrete. A section of the floor that should have been shielded by meters of protective matting had been left exposed. There was only half the required padding. Her skull collided with the unforgiving surface with catastrophic force. The sound echoed like a grim warning through the gym. Coaches and teammates rushed to her side, but it was too late. Rushed to Townsville General Hospital. Michelle's condition was critical. Her family clung to hope, but by the next day that hope had vanished. Michelle was gone. A bright, laughing daughter, sister, and friend had been taken in the most preventable way imaginable. Investigations revealed chilling negligence. Her coach wasn't qualified to teach the move she attempted. Someone had moved the mat earlier and failed to replace it. No one double-checked. And because of that single lapse, Michelle lost her life. Her mother, Anne, later recounted the horrifying truth. Her skull was smashed to smithereens. Words no parent should ever speak. The tragedy sent shockwaves through Queensland. Safety audits across gymnastics clubs exposed alarming deficiencies. Only 8% of facilities had adequate measures to prevent contact with hard surfaces. Many gyms operated with unqualified coaches, poor planning, and unsafe equipment. Michelle's death wasn't a freak accident. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Townsville Gymnastics was eventually fined $70,000 for breaching safety obligations. But for Michelle's family, no fine, no report, no punishment could restore what was lost. Anne called it bitter justice. "I wasn't expecting her not to come home," she said quietly, still grappling with the weight of such preventable loss. On what would have been Michelle's 22nd birthday, her family gathered outside the same gym, lighting candles in the dark. Each flickering flame was a tribute, a warning, a reminder of a life cut far too short. Anne's plea to others was stark and urgent. Don't take the manager's word for it. Check for yourself. Michelle had returned to gymnastics not as a competitor chasing medals, but as a young woman reclaiming a passion she loved. She wasn't seeking fame, just joy, yet her story became a haunting testament to what can happen when safety is ignored. A chilling reminder that behind every flip, every landing, the smallest oversight can turn deadly.
An Immigration and Refugee Board hearing in Calgary has ordered the truck driver who caused the deadly Humboldt Broncos bus crash to be deported.
Not every roadside horror involves a famous face, but some tragedies cut even deeper because of how many lives they shatter at once. On the evening of April 6, 2018, a quiet stretch of highway in rural Saskatchewan became the site of one of Canada's most devastating road disasters. A moment that would forever change an entire country's relationship with a small-town junior hockey team called the Humboldt Broncos. The bus was carrying young men who were living their dreams. Teenagers and young adults, many still in high school or just out of it, bonded by early morning practices, long road trips, and the belief that hockey could take them somewhere bigger. They were heading to a playoff game in Nipawin, focused on strategy, joking with teammates, texting family members, thinking about the ice ahead. The weather was clear. The sun was still out. The road was dry and familiar. There was nothing to suggest that this routine trip would become their last. As the coach bus traveled northbound on Highway 35 at normal highway speed, it approached an intersection locals knew well, one marked by stop signs and flashing red lights for cross traffic. The players never saw what was coming. From the west, a semi-trailer truck loaded with peat moss approached the same intersection. The stop sign was oversized. The red lights were blinking. Multiple warning signs appeared well in advance. And yet, the truck did not slow. It did not stop. Traveling at highway speed, it entered the intersection directly into the bus's path. There was no time to react, no room to swerve. The bus driver slammed on the brakes just seconds before impact, but physics had already decided the outcome. The bus struck the semi's trailer in a devastating T-bone collision. The front of the coach absorbed the full force, crumpling instantly. The sound of tearing metal echoed across the empty fields as the bus and truck were thrown off the road, both landing on their sides. The damage was beyond comprehension. The front section of the bus, where many of the youngest players were seated, was destroyed. 16 people were killed, some instantly. 13 others were injured, several critically, their lives permanently altered. Survivors later spoke of sudden silence, confusion, and the realization that teammates beside them were no longer moving. Hockey gear, personal bags, and shattered glass were scattered across the intersection, frozen in time. First responders rushed in from surrounding towns, many of them parents, billets, or lifelong hockey fans themselves. Even seasoned paramedics and firefighters described the scene as overwhelming. Helicopters landed nearby to airlift the most severely injured. Hospitals hundreds of kilometers away declared mass casualty emergencies. Inside churches and community halls, families gathered, waiting in fear. Phones rang. Some parents heard their child was alive. Others waited as hours passed. By the end of the night, police officers were delivering the news that would forever break families apart. As the investigation unfolded, the details made the loss even harder to accept. The weather had been clear. Visibility was unobstructed. The truck driver was not impaired. It came down to a single failure to yield at a clearly marked intersection. The crash was later described as entirely preventable and an unbearable truth for those left behind. The aftermath spread far beyond Saskatchewan. Across Canada, hockey sticks were placed outside front doors in silent tribute. Millions of dollars were donated to support victims and families. Arenas held vigils. Jerseys were retired. The story of the Humboldt Broncos became a national wound, one that united the country in grief, reflection, and sorrow. Some survivors would go on to face lifelong disabilities, relearning how to walk, adapting to a future they never imagined. Tragedy struck the gymnastics world on September 13, 2025, when 19-year-old Naufal Tagir Albari, one of Indonesia's brightest rising stars, was training in Penza, Russia. The young athlete, preparing for his country's upcoming World Championships, was attempting a high bar routine, a skill meant to dazzle, to push the limits of human strength and precision. But in a heartbeat, everything changed. Albari fell awkwardly into a foam pit, the result of what was described as a severe neck injury. The crowd of spectators may have been absent, but the echo of that moment would resonate across continents. Rushed to GA Zakaran Hospital, Albari spent 12 agonizing days in intensive care. Hope lingered in the hearts of his coaches, teammates, and family. But despite the best efforts of doctors, he passed away on September 25th. Indonesia lost not just a talented gymnast, but a young man whose dreams were intertwined with the nation's pride, a hopeful contender for the 2028 Olympics, whose life was abruptly cut short. The news rippled through the gymnastics community like a shockwave. Ita Yuliati, president of the Indonesian Gymnastics Federation, spoke with heartbreak. Albari was a talented young athlete and a good person. Indonesian gymnastics has lost one of the nation's finest sons. This is a deep blow and sorrow for us. May the family be given strength. Across borders, the Russian Gymnastics Federation confirmed it was investigating the incident. Vasily Titov, the federation's vice president, offered condolences and assistance with repatriating Albari's body, adding, "Unfortunately, the athlete was not prepared to perform such a complex element." The timing of the tragedy made it even more poignant, with the 2025 Artistic Gymnastics World Championships set to take place in Jakarta just a month later. Albari's absence left a void that could not be filled. He had been expected to compete for medals at SEA Games 33 and had the potential to represent Indonesia on the Olympic stage. His passing, CNN Indonesia reported, was a heavy blow to the country's gymnastics scene. And for many, it served as a chilling reminder of just how fragile life can be, even for the strongest and most disciplined athletes. Albari's accident evokes memories of past gymnastics tragedies, from Julissa Gomez, who was paralyzed after a vault and later died from complications, to Elena Mukina, the Soviet star whose life was claimed by the Thomas Salto in 1980. For Albari, the pursuit of excellence ended in heartbreak, leaving a nation and a sport mourning the loss of a promising life taken too soon. In the quiet aftermath of his passing, fans, fellow athletes, and young gymnasts around the world are left to reflect. Even amid the beauty, precision, and artistry of gymnastics, danger always lurks, a single moment capable of shattering dreams forever.
On September 30th, 1955, a silver Porsche races down Highway 466. James Dean is at the wheel. He has just finished shooting his third film, Giant, 2 days before.
At just 24 years old, James Dean was standing on the edge of something bigger than fame. East of Eden had already proven his talent. Rebel Without a Cause had turned him into the voice of restless youth, and Hollywood could feel a long, legendary career unfolding in real time. But on the afternoon of September 30th, 1955, that future quietly began to slip away 1 mile at a time. On the open roads of California, Dean wasn't just acting the role of a rebel. Off-screen, he chased speed with the same intensity he brought to his performances. Racing wasn't a hobby, it was an obsession. He had already proven himself on the track, earning podium finishes and respect among seasoned drivers. That obsession followed him on his final day. Instead of towing his newly purchased Porsche 5i50 Spyder to the Salinas road race, Dean chose to drive it himself, eager to feel the car, to bond with it. He called it Little Bastard, a name that felt playful then but would soon take on a far darker meaning. The day unfolded slowly, almost normally. Coffee and donuts before departure, a gas stop, a conversation here, a laugh there. At one point, Dean was pulled over for speeding, just a warning in the moment, but chilling in hindsight. As the miles stretched on, the countryside grew quieter, the road more open. The Spyder pulled ahead, leaving the trailing vehicle far behind. Dean was alone with the engine, the road, and the rush he loved so much. Then came the intersection. At around 5:45 p.m., on a rural stretch near Joslin, a car ahead turned dead left across the highway. In that split second, Dean realized what was happening. There was no space, no escape route, no miracle braking distance. The Porsche slammed into the other vehicle almost head-on, the force launching the lightweight car into violent cartwheels before it crashed down beside the road. The silence afterward was broken only by screaming metal and stunned witnesses running toward the wreckage. James Dean was pulled from the twisted remains of the Spider, unconscious, gravely injured. Those who reached him first could feel a faint pulse, but it was already fading. By the time the ambulance arrived and rushed him to the hospital, the fight was over. He was pronounced dead on arrival. 24 years old, 3 major films, a career and a life cut brutally short on the side of an unremarkable road. The impact of his death rippled far beyond that lonely intersection. James Dean didn't just die, he became immortal. His roadside death transformed him into a symbol of lost youth, reckless freedom, and the cruel randomness of fate. A quiet highway became the final stage for one of Hollywood's brightest stars, proving that sometimes history doesn't end in grand finales, but in sudden, horrifying silence. Samantha Cerio was the embodiment of balance of strength, intellect, and purpose. A senior at Auburn University, she wasn't just a gymnast. She was a scholar, an engineer, a perfectionist. While others chased fame, Samantha chased the stars literally. With a job offer from Boeing and her aerospace engineering degree nearly complete, she seemed destined to conquer every challenge she set her mind to. On the mat, she moved with elegance and precision. Off it, she carried herself with humility and discipline. Teammates admired her. Coaches trusted her. The future was hers to command. And then, in a single brutal moment, it all changed. April 5th, 2019. NCAA Regional Semifinals in Baton Rouge. It should have been another exhilarating performance. One more chance for Samantha to help Auburn advance. The arena buzzed with energy. Music, cheers, chalk dust in the air, routine warm-ups. Nothing out of the ordinary. Samantha stepped onto the floor with quiet focus, ready to pour 18 years of her life into a final, flawless routine. Then came the tumbling pass, the double front flip, and then the sound. A sickening, heart-stopping collapse. She had under-rotated by just a fraction of a second. It was enough. Both knees buckled. She crumpled to the mat, screaming in pain. Tendons tore, knees dislocated. The music stopped. The crowd went silent. Medical staff rushed in, but even as she remained conscious, the agony was unbearable. Within hours, video footage of the accident had spread across the internet. Millions watched. Millions dissected the worst moment of her life. And Samantha, already grappling with unimaginable pain, saw her private disaster turned into public spectacle. "My pain is not your entertainment," she tweeted. Later, in an interview with Today, she said, "You kind of want to watch it just to see what happens, but you don't think about the people it could impact." Her courage became a new kind of strength, not about sticking a landing, but about reclaiming her dignity. Weeks later, she posted on Instagram, "I am hanging up my grips and leaving the chalk behind." Gymnastics was over, but Samantha's voice remained firm, her spirit unbroken. Her next goal? Walk down the aisle on her own feet? Through multiple surgeries and months of grueling therapy, she fought back, refusing to let her body dictate her future. And when she finally walked down that aisle, she smiled with every step, a victory of resilience over tragedy. Her story didn't just end with retirement, it sparked a conversation. Why were dangerous routines still rewarded? Why weren't safer measures in place to protect athletes like her? Coach Jeff Graba later called that night one of the toughest of my life, but Samantha's grace became a guidepost for everyone who witnessed it. She reminded the world that true strength isn't only about what happens in the air, it's about how you rise when everything falls. July 16th, 2003 began like the kind of summer day people look forward to all week. In Santa Monica, Arizona Avenue had been shut down and transformed into a farmer's market, bursting with color and life. Produce stands overflowed with fruit. Vendors called out cheerfully. Families wandered between stalls, children tugging at hands. elderly couples lingering in the sun. With nearly 9,000 people expected, the street felt alive and safe. Cars were gone. Barricades were up. No one felt the need to look over their shoulder. Then, in a matter of seconds, that illusion collapsed. At 1:47 p.m., a 1992 Buick LeSabre rolled west toward Arizona Avenue. Behind the wheel sat 86-year-old George Russell Weller. As he approached the barricaded market, his car struck a Mercedes stopped at a crosswalk. It should have ended there. Instead, something went terribly wrong. His foot pressed harder. The engine screamed, and instead of stopping, the Buick surged forward. Witnesses watched in disbelief as the car swerved around the barricades and tore into the heart of the market. The Buick became a weapon, accelerating through the crowd 40, 60, maybe even 70 miles per hour, plowing nearly 1,000 feet in seconds. Stalls exploded on impact. Tables snapped. Produce, shoes, bags, and bodies were hurled into the air. Screams filled the street. Some people ran, others froze, unable to move as the engine roared closer. A small blue stroller sat abandoned near the curb, stained with blood, the stroller of a 3-year-old girl who would never go home. Bodies lay scattered across the pavement. Red blankets covered the wounded. Yellow tarps hid the dead. At the center of the destruction sat the red Buick, windshield shattered, metal twisted, finally still. The car only stopped when a pedestrian was thrown onto the hood, blocking Weller's view. A bicycle officer pulled the elderly driver from the vehicle. Witnesses described him as dazed and confused, seemingly unable to grasp what had just happened. When the dust settled, 10 people were dead. More than 70 were injured, many permanently. Survivors later spoke of panic attacks in crowds, of how the sound of engines still made their hearts race. Tests showed no alcohol, no drugs, and no mechanical failure. Weller said he had hit the accelerator instead of the brake and panicked. There were no arrests, just questions. More than 30 lawsuits followed. By 2008, Santa Monica had paid $21 million to victims and families. Stronger barriers were installed years too late. A warning about the market's vulnerability had been ignored. George Weller died in 2010 at age 94. The crash was not intentional, but for the families who lost loved ones and for survivors who still carry the trauma, the outcome is unchanged.